The name of George Yeardley is known only to connoisseurs of the history of the USA. Meanwhile, experts call him nothing less than one of the fathers of American democracy. It turned out that it was his remains that rested in the Jamestown grave. The biography of Yeardley, one of the first governors of the city, can easily become the basis for the script of a thrilling Hollywood film about a man who made himself, and in very difficult circumstances. In 1585, English ships docked on the east coast in the area of present-day North Carolina. The expedition was led by Walter Raleigh. He came to develop the New World by order of Queen Elizabeth. Raleigh named the discovered lands Virginia. Why exactly? It is not known for certain, but later this name was transferred to one of the American states. They founded a colony on Roanoke Island. Now this is also the territory of North Carolina, but the first group of settlers could not withstand the harsh conditions and returned home, and the second disappeared. When an expedition from England arrived on the island with supplies, they found an abandoned settlement, and not a soul. Where more than 100 people disappeared is still a mystery. Only 20 years later, the English decided to make a new attempt to settle the territories across the ocean, now with the blessing and financial support of King James I. In December 1606, 104 people on 3 ships arrived on the east coast, but landed further north than their predecessors, on the territory of present-day Virginia. Here, on the river, they founded a settlement. The reservoir was named in honour of their monarch, James. This is the English version of the name Jacob. The king himself was a native of Scotland, and the colony, accordingly, was Jamestown. King James Stuart. He took the expansion of English opportunities very seriously. Well, this was quite understandable in a state of conflict with Spain, in a state of conflict with France. The war for new territories in a situation where there were not so many new territories in Europe. These were overseas territories, which means they need to be developed. Soon, several more groups of settlers arrived in Jamestown. Their total number grew to 300 people. But after 3 years, less than 100 residents remained in the town. The development of new territories was very difficult. It had an unfortunate geographical location, suitable for making a port. But to live there, it was very unfortunate. Firstly, the water there was very bad. Secondly, it was on swamps, and, accordingly, the very high mortality rate of the settlers at the first stage was caused by this circumstance, that the water there was bad. The colonists hoped that the climate in the centre of the east coast would be the same as in Europe at the same latitudes, mild and warm. But they encountered significant temperature fluctuations when a frosty winter was replaced by a dry summer. This led to the fact that almost all the crops of the first years were lost. Any settlers experienced difficulties in adapting to a new land, since they are used to running a household in the old way, in their old conditions. Naturally, the plants and some means brought with them could be completely unsuitable and not take root in the new territories. In addition to all the other problems, the English were forced to repel raids from not at all friendly neighbours, the Algonquian Indians. They did not like the fact that the pale-faced strangers had seized their lands. In 1609, they blockaded Jamestown, cutting it off from the port through which supplies were coming. The colonists had almost no food supplies, and a terrible famine began. There were animals that they brought with them. There were not so many of these animals. In the end, naturally, they ate sick animals, they ate old animals, they ate everything that moves from the animal world in general. I suspect that here they encountered a whole range of diseases, because swamp animals are not the healthiest for human food. Archaeologists during excavations in Jamestown found terrible evidence of those hungry months. For example, cracked teeth of donkeys and horses, and inside, microparticles of iron tools. Driven to despair, the settlers dug out the soft tissue, the pulp, from the animal's teeth and ate it. In the end, they ate almost everything they had. An act of cannibalism was noted. That is, they ate at least one person. In 1610, a new expedition came to the aid of the dying colonists. This was a military detachment of 150 people under the command of Thomas West, Lord de la Warr. It was in his honour that later they would name a state of the USA and an Indian tribe living on this territory. The English government appointed West as governor of Jamestown, but he eventually delegated his powers to Thomas Gates, and his bodyguard and right-hand man became the 23-year-old guard captain George Yeardley. He was the son of a not very wealthy London merchant and tailor, but did not want to follow in his father's footsteps and chose a military career. As part of a company of infantrymen, he fought against the Spaniards in the Netherlands, showed himself to be a brave soldier, and his leadership recommended the young daredevil to de la Warr and Gates to take with them to Jamestown. For 6 years, George Yeardley faithfully carried out various assignments from his superiors. Governors in the colony changed almost every year. For example, he organised an expedition to the mountains in search of gold and silver. True, it was not crowned with success. Nevertheless, in 1616, Yeardley rose to the rank of vice-governor, and 2 years later, his star hour came. The Virginia Company in London, which dealt with the affairs of the American colony, appointed George Yeardley to lead Jamestown, and James the Vines summoned him for an audience in England and knighted him. The most interesting achievement of his governorship is that he transferred broad powers to the House of Burgesses, and in this case, this was the very beginning of democracy, which will be crowned in the future, already in the second half of the 18th century, in the War for Independence. This is 1776, the Declaration of Independence, and all subsequent events in American history. However, George Yeardley was not only the creator of democratic institutions of power, but also one of the first slave owners in North America. In 1619, a ship with 24 slaves arrived in Jamestown. They were taken from the territory of present-day Angola. Africans as slaves began to work on the plantations of the richest residents of the city, including Yeardley. The son of a poor merchant by that time had become a very wealthy man. Yeardley had extensive land holdings. This is a 1,000-acre plot of land on Mulberry Island. It was located on the James River. There they grew tobacco, corn, and raised cattle. Then he bought another large plantation on the south bank of the river and named it Flower Dew in honour of his wife. George Yeardley's wife and mother of his 3 children, Temperance Flowerdew, was one of those brave English women who were not afraid to leave home for the edge of the world. She met her future husband already in Jamestown. The first English colonists were, naturally, men. But over time, when they adapted to the new lands, the British authorities faced the question: how to lure women there so that the city's population would grow not only due to new arrivals. For representatives of the fair sex who were ready to drastically change their lives and move to America, special state support measures were developed. Women were allowed to choose their husbands independently upon arrival there. Women were provided with a dowry, which they, as English brides, could not afford while remaining at home. They were given a start-up capital for building a house, and thus women were eventually recruited. George Yeardley did not enjoy a happy family life for long. He died on November 13, 1627, at the age of 40. Moreover, at the time of his death, he was in his second gubernatorial term. What happened to him, historians find it difficult to say. But one thing is certain: the widow did not skimp on the headstone. As scientists found out, it was ordered in Europe and brought across the Atlantic. The headstone looks like marble, but in fact, it is polished limestone. Hundreds of millions of years ago, it was part of the seabed, and since then, inclusions have remained in the material. Pieces of shells, remains of marine organisms. Research has shown that they all come from the territory of present-day Belgium. Black limestone has been mined there since the times of the Roman Empire. Only very wealthy people in the 17th century could order the delivery of such a boulder across half the world to America. Jamestown existed for about 70 years after the death of Governor George Yeardley. In 1698, the capital of the English colony was moved to Williamsburg, and the oldest British settlement on the continent fell into decay. But in the 20th century, it was revived. True, in a different capacity. Now this is an open-air museum. Active archaeological excavations are underway there. Researchers are certainly awaiting many surprising discoveries that will help better understand what modern America began with.